Hello, good afternoon. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, sir.
Okay. So good afternoon to everyone here. I'm Erick Calata, an assistant professor at the Department of Political Science and International Studies at the Polytechnic University of the Philippines. So welcome to the very first PISO virtual conference and also to the very first panel for this conference. Just this morning, we have witnessed the outstanding keynote presentation delivered by Dr. Dalia Simangan from the Hiroshima University. She started her presentation by the origin and etymology of the term Anthropocene. And in her presentation, she mentioned that Anthropocene as a worldwide phenomenon and problem originated with man's discovery and mastery of fire. It's true that bigger things started from small beginnings. The fire, which earlier human beings ignited millions of years back, sparked like a kindled flaming problem that we are still experiencing today. And the effects are becoming more extensive in the future if we do not act to minimize and stop the effects of the Anthropocene. Dr. Simangan also noted about the invention of agriculture as another epoch contributing to the rise of the Anthropocene. Unlike fire, which is naturally part of nature and therefore can be discovered, agriculture is one of the earlier inventions of man to control the environment and to get rid from the nomadic way of life and establish a definite place to live in. Hence, the period when earlier, the period which earlier invented by man designated the roles, which designated the roles of people in the society. They also invented the very notion of private property. The invention of private property, became so powerful that it propelled societies to become belligerent with each other until such time that colonialism was waged by European powers to subjugate and loot the New World and indigenous communities around the world. Along with these interventions was the idea of the super being, of superhuman being, a civilized man, a humanitas, a white and intelligent man. The origin of the social sciences that we have today can be traced back to this description. Sociology, for instance, was initially conceived in Europe to study the cultured and civilized white man. Then came anthropology, which was initially used to study the anthropos, or the uncivilized and uncultured people with colors. Political science too is grounded in the Westphalian notion of the state. Psychology veered towards standardizing the Western intellectual and behavioral attributes of a Western white man. And international studies, which was originally founded on the Western-centric and dominant theories. So it's high time that we revisit the different fields of social sciences, especially our very own field, international relations or international studies. Perhaps one way to frame this revisit is to question for whom social sciences are for. And in the time of an anthropocentric world currently disrupted by pandemic, we should ask, how do we better social sciences to address the anthropocenic problem of our time? So welcome to the panel session, or session 1, which is entitled Revisiting the Disciplines through the Anthropocentric to the Anthropocene. And we are going to witness 3 paper presentations today. First is the paper which will be presented by Ishtiaque Ahmed Levin. I hope I pronounce it well, the correct name, from Jawaharlal Nehru University. This is from India. And the paper is entitled Mapping the Anthropocentric Challenges to the Social Sciences. And the second paper that we're going to witness today is entitled Sickness Unto Death, a Kierkegaardian reset in the time of the pandemic, which is to be presented by Rhochie, Avelino, Ebora from Ebora Matienzo from the University of Santo Tomas-Department of Philosophy. And also we have a third presenter by the name of Father Delfo Canceran, OP, and his paper is entitled Decolonizing the Anthropocene. So as a rule, you are going to, for the presenters, you are only you're going to present your paper for just 10 minutes, and after that, after the first presenter, then will be followed by the second presenter and the third. Then after the presentations are done, the 3 presentations are done, then I'm going to ask. We're going to ask the audience and the participants today for their questions. So is the first presenter ready? We're calling on Ishtiaque Ahmed Levin from JNU, India, to present his paper, Mapping the Anthropocenic Challenges to the Social Sciences. Hello, Ishtiaque.
Hello.
Yes.
Am I
So
audible?
you can start your presentation now. Welcome to the conference.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to my presentation. My name is Ishtiaque Ahmed Levin. I'm currently pursuing my PhD in anthropology from Jawaharlal Nehru University, New Delhi. The title of my presentation is Mapping the Anthropocene Challenges to Social Science. Moving beyond the dichotomy of nature-culture and the earlier formulations of the human-environment relationship, the Anthropocene has emerged as one of the most important scientific concepts of the new millennium. Therefore, the conception of social life has been transformed as it has become deeply entangled within the dynamics of the planet itself. In this transformed theoretical terrain, how should social sciences respond to the challenges posed by the Anthropocene? This paper argues that the presuppositions of the social sciences about the social need to be revisited. The social has to be understood as a product of a dynamic art system, self-organizing over deep time. A transdisciplinary approach is required to reconceptualize the social, which is able to cope with the planetary challenges posed by the Anthropocene. We need to see the social forces through a planetary lens to understand the world-transforming power of humanity, which is always in complex interaction with the inhuman forces of the planet. This paper suggests that we need a paradigm shift in social science to understand humanity's altered relationship with our changing planet. From a transdisciplinary perspective, this paper contends that social scientists should allow planetary forces to redefine the very conception of the social. Conjoining various multidisciplinary approaches, this paper argues social science can illuminate emergent socio-natural processes and chart a path through them to meet the theoretical challenges of the Anthropocene. The Anthropocene, the historical trajectory of the concept. The planetary history was set on a new course when our ancestors invented the use of fire around 400,000 years ago most likely somewhere in Africa. The human control of fire significantly affected the Earth's ecosystem and introduced a new epoch, which is known as the Anthropocene. James Scott argues that the thin Anthropocene has been getting thicker ever since, with the developments of the course of human history, such as adoption of farming, invention of steam engine, which fundamentally changed the idea of so-called natural world. The concept of the Anthropocene was first elaborated by Eugene Stormer and Paul Cruzen in the 2000s. Though the idea first emerged in the domain of art sciences, gradually it has become a significant concept in the domains of social sciences and humanities, inspiring multidisciplinary dialogues about the entanglement of multiple forms of life and art processes. The Anthropocene signals an epoch which is characterized by anthropogenic climate change and biodiversity loss, and the large-scale destruction of ecological communities, leading to the sixth great extinction. In this context, Connolly argues, quote, indeed, the Anthropocene has become whirlwind of today with its impeccable flooding of low-lying zones, glacier melts, temperature increases, intense storms, expanding zones of drought, proliferating species extinctions, ocean acidification, threat to monsoons, refugee crisis, and potential shifts in the planetary ocean conveyor belt. What is the Anthropocene and why it matters to social science? We are living in the planetary age of the Anthropocene, otherwise known as the age of man. The Anthropocene signifies that humans have become a geological force. This exceptional planetary scale crisis compels us to question who is the anthropos of the Anthropocene. Contemporary theorists suggest that the Anthropocene is a deeply problematic concept because it hides troublesome differences between humans. To facilitate engagement across diverse academic disciplines for dealing with the challenges of the Anthropocene, the social sciences need to embrace multidisciplinarity to provide a new definition of the social. The social sciences need to put emphasis on existential interconnectivity, which resists Western humanism's technocratic narrative of progress. This cross-disciplinary theoretical endeavor becomes pertinent when neoliberal capitalism is radically transforming the lives and landscapes of the planet, reconfiguring the registers, what Felix Guattari has called the three ecologies, namely those of the environment, of social relations, and human subjectivity. The Anthropocene, a rupture in the modern imaginary. The Anthropocene constitutes a rupture in the modern imaginary. Dipesh Chakraborty argues that, quote, yet climate change poses for us a question of a human collectivity and us pointing to a figure of the universal that escapes our capacity to experience the world. It is more like a universal that arises from a shared sense of a catastrophe. It calls for a global approach to politics without the myth of a global identity. For, unlike a Hegelian universal, it cannot subsume particularities. We may provisionally call it a negative universal history, unquote. The relevance of social science for decolonizing the Anthropocene. The Anthropocene, as an ontological category, is the clear manifestation of the apocalyptic trajectory of racial capitalism. The Anthropocene is not merely an object of scientific research, it has to be understood through the prism of social science, which bears immense political consequences. Considering what it signifies to live in the Anthropocene, the social sciences need to focus on various ideas of social justice to outline the ethics of justice in the new climate regime. Through these intellectual encounters, social science can develop an ontological framework for addressing the question of human agency in the Anthropocene, considering the long history of decolonization in Asia. Social science needs to have conversation with indigenous tradition to counter detrimental effects of the Anthropocene. The task of engaging with decolonial ideas in the Anthropocene is also a task of radical ecological imagination. Social science can expand this project of radical ecological imagination by engaging with decolonial ideas embedded in various traditions in the global South. The challenges of deep time to social science. The advent of the Anthropocene compels us to understand human temporality in the context of the deep time of planetary history. The concept of deep time poses an anthropological problem because it is deeply entangled with people's phenomenal worlds of experience. Therefore, social science needs to address the temporal challenges posed by the Anthropocene. With the advent of ontological turn, the specter of the vanished non-human has resurfaced in the theoretical discussion, posing a challenge to the anthropocentric worldview of social science. The recent non-human turn has further questioned the long presumed anthroposupremacy of social science. Confronted by the sixth mass extinction, animals, plants, and other species, which were previously confined to the realm of zoe or bare life, have started to resurface in the political discourses alongside humans with their own biographical and political lives. Social science needs a paradigm shift to address these temporal challenges of the Anthropocene. Social science needs to go beyond anthropocentric perception of time to facilitate possible anthropological engagements with environmental temporalities. Envisioning more than human social science in the Anthropocene. The Anthropocene calls for the reassembling of social and compels us to envision more than human social science. The Anthropocene as a new planetary epoch suggests that natural processes can no longer be separated from the historical, social, and economic and political processes. In line with the scholars who studied unprecedented analytical challenges posed by Anthropocene ideas, postcolonial historian Dipesh Chakraborty argues that the human being is intrinsically bound up with the natural world through the collective effects of the species as a geological force. With the advent of ontological turn in the Anthropocene studies, the specter of the vanished non-human has resurfaced in the theoretical discussions, posing a challenge to the anthropocentric worldview. Confronted by sea level rise, global warming, and anthropogenic climate change, animals, plants, microbes, and other species, which were previously confined to the realm of zoe or bare life, lives which are killable, have started to resurface in the political discourses alongside humans with their own biographical and political lives. The COVID-19 pandemic is the concrete manifestation of the ontological insecurities of the Anthropocene. The pandemic demonstrates that the non-humans can turn into influential agents of history who are capable of disrupting the social order. Therefore, by critiquing anthropocentrism, which is embedded in global environmental narratives, social sciences need to engage with alternative conceptions of being and multi-species becoming with, produced by indigenous eco-experiences and narratives. So, to conclude, the Anthropocene signals a reunion of historical time and geological time, debunking temporal, ontological, epistemological, and institutional divide between nature and society, human agency and non-human agency, social sciences and natural sciences, the dichotomies which are sustained by the industrial modernity. Timothy Morton argues that the Anthropocene signifies the end of the world as the background known as the world which is meant to support human life world appears to be contingent, volatile, and unpredictable. As Bruno Latour suggests, the Anthropocene signals a crucial juncture of history wherein the nature, instead of being reduced to a decor for human history, becomes a major protagonist by entirely bypassing the dualism of nature and culture. As the idea of Anthropocene abolishes the break between nature and culture, between human history and history of life and art, the entanglement of these frontiers necessitates a new consideration of the sociological and the ecological as parts of the same metabolism. Anna Singh mobilizes Gilles Deleuze's concept of assemblage, which, unlike the linear idea of progress, incorporates many voices, multiple perspectives, multiple ecological entities, and a polyphonous consideration of the life force of many species. This political praxis also paves the avenue for situated knowledge produced by collaborating agents and also intra and interspecies interaction and becoming with. In the context of the Anthropocene, this political praxis would redefine the political task par excellence and lead us beyond the narrow confines of the purely human into an uncanny terrain of new alliances and new possibilities. It is only through such a political praxis, understanding our victimhood in an alliance with other species, that we can become capable of collective action and meet the challenges of the Anthropocene. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Ahmed, for the very nice presentation. Let's call on for the second presenter to present to us his paper entitled Sickness Unto Death, a Kierkegaardian Reset in the Time of Pandemic by Rhochie, Avelino, Ebora from Ebora Matienzo from the University of Santo Tomas, Department of Philosophy. Welcome, Sir Matienzo. You may now start your presentation. Thank you.
Good day to everyone. Let me begin. Sickness Unto Death, a Kierkegaardian Reset in the Time of Pandemic. My aim is to explore Kierkegaardian notion of despair in his work Sickness Unto Death, 1849, to reflect on possible solutions in coping with the ramifications of the present pandemic. Although Anthropocene is a scientific term, I would like to philosophically examine despair to seek practical answers that may address people at this stage of evolution, specifically those in urgent need of psychical cure from the spiritual claustrophobia that leads to a waning view of humanity towards life amidst these trying times. I will argue that Kierkegaardian despair may provide us a spiritual cure to humanity, particularly those who lost their loved ones and continue to fight for their lives as we speak. These undenying realities of today's Anthropocene. As a caveat, the thoughts in this essay originally written weeks after the imposition of lockdown in March 2020, which I will try to correlate with the data at present. It was December of 2019 in Wuhan, China, when the first case of coronavirus disease was reported. As of October 21, the Johns Hopkins University Research Center says for a reported 4.8 million deaths and almost 245 million were infected globally. In the Philippines, there are already 2.7 million infected and more than 42,000 died. With the state-of-the-art technology and nearly 25 months of rigorous research, the cause of the virus remains unknown. Hence, the most certain in the minds of the many is uncertainty. In developing countries such as ours, the most sensible remedy is isolation by way of quarantine due to the scarcity of available vaccines. A group of medical researchers, among others, conclude that the pandemic poses a threat to society's mental health in the Philippines. The incessant anxiety leads to depression. A persistent loss of hope brought by depression leaves many in despair. In the introduction of the book, Sickness Unto Death, Kierkegaard asserts that being a Christian author is a physician to someone sick in bed. For him, there is a greater disease that obliterates people, which we dread more than death itself. Common today is the fear of what tomorrow might bring. None of us is sure until when we will remain employed. We are left with opportunities wasted, goals missed, resulting in unstable financial and food security. All are afraid of contracting the virus. All are afraid to die. For Kierkegaard, all these are symptoms of a higher fear. Unfortunately, most of us are unaware of it. We treat this basic fear as a problem of existentialities that require solutions. The pandemic brought us human awareness anew, which we refuse to confront. This is where difficulty comes in. That is when the spiritual is treated in a reificatory manner, with objects ready to fix anything about human frailties. Yet this is not the case. As Gabriel Marcel puts it, life is not a problem to be solved, but a mystery to be lived. The advent of pandemic brings in more than degradation of scientia, human knowledge, but a disruption of human flourishing. We physically fear which in real sense a metaphysical monstrosity. This deception ignores the imminent and considers death an impossible reality that many of us vehemently deny, even the most intelligent and opulent ones. As a result, experts fall into idiocy. Great leaders mess up. Good-natured couples get separated. Valedictorians lose zest in learning, and the toughest surrenders. For Kierkegaard, this is worse than physical death, since we are afraid with a kind of fear that we are not afraid of. This fear is despair. In Sickness Unto Death, Kierkegaard describes despair as man is a synthesis of the finite, of the infinite and the finite, of the temporal and the eternal, of freedom and necessity. One therefore lives in the tension between the physical and the spiritual. In the same pages, he distinguishes three forms of despair. The first is the despair not to be conscious of oneself. The second is despair not to will to be oneself. And third is the despair to will to oneself. The first two are controlled by externalities and classified as material despair, while the third is spiritual. The first two fall into nowadays psychological notion of depression brought about by anxiety, while the third is the most disparaging of all anxieties, leading to spiritual death. All three are most felt in the time of quarantine. In isolation and uncertainty, we are highly anxious about something we cannot clearly understand but absolutely feel. The root of despair is the confusion between the material and the spiritual. As stated, man is a synthesis of the infinite and the finite. A human person is composed of material and spiritual constituents. This is nothing new, as explained by the ancient medieval anthropology, yet the failure to distinguish the two is perennially the case. This confusion is the genesis of despair. Unfortunately, humanity is a victim to this. Kierkegaard explains that despair is a default condition of the individual, and as such, something universal. When we mistakenly attribute the spiritual with the material, the difficulty sets in. This lures the self more than the physical attraction. This results in when we become overly dependent on worldly matters and other people. This could be community, the society, or even the religion we belong to. We are so engaged with the externalities, we choose to forget that there is more essential to life. The invisible virus is infecting us without us knowing it. Yet, the irony is, we are all aware of it from the start. This is because it is rooted from within. It is personal, meaning no one can tell you to choose otherwise but yourself. Lockdowns. Before the quarantine, we dream of lying in bed and sleeping all day. At work, we daydream about long months holiday. We even steal 5 to 10 minutes of sleep and dub it power nap. At present, we stare wide awake 3 o'clock in the morning, waiting for drowsiness to touch our eyes. With our overstay at home, we listen to the dropping water from the faucet to finish another restful day. For moms, going to grocery store is a tedious and time-consuming routine. But now, even husbands anticipate this day having the privilege of going out. The tourists trapped in cruise ships turned celebrations into a curse. Our heroes, overseas foreign workers, are refused entrance returning to their hometowns. Reunions became a crime. Before, when one gets sick, the mother will watch over. Now a simple sneeze becomes a national threat. Health facilities are extended in the hallways. Shaded trees and parked cars serve as hospital beds. In countries like Brazil and Italy, street corners have become graveyards. Reports had turned into names. Names became friends. Friends became our families, eventually ourselves as victims. One cannot help but experience fear of losing control over things of our lives. This, among others, bring us to a sense of hopelessness in this world. This is despair. The cure. For Kierkegaardian diagnosis, we are afraid of dying not because of death, but with the very thought that we are not prepared to leave the people and things most dear to us. It is neither the physical disease nor the suffering that dread us most, but the unfinished businesses we have with the world. In the moment of death, the one discovers his or her temporality, that is, the brevity of life, as if saying, my existence is insignificant to be remembered by anyone. If despair is a spiritual disease more dreading than the physical self, what then is the cure? Is there a vaccine that provides us with hope and spare us from such a metaphysical contagion? This suggests that the cure is also spiritual. This antidote is faith. Faith is personal. This is true with the COVID-19 survivors and those who are still fighting as we speak. Their testimonies are rooted in a belief that fuels them positivity amidst despair and anxiety. For survivors reflecting on people and things they cherish most, it is essential. But the strength to move on comes from the divine whom they commune with isolation, inwardly and personally. This is the spiritual remedy that fuels them to fight. It also made them promise a life of gratitude and service to everyone once healed. Reset. In Kierkegaard's faith prescription, one need not be technically religious, but must be perfectly still. During the pandemic, funerals without rituals are more sympathetic than ever. For the fortunate ones, farewells are said through two-way radio or via FaceTime, yet most heartfelt. Of course, all forms of death are earnest, but the pandemic made it enormously meaningful. Most victims die in silence and stillness of isolation. The worship of congregations had become obsolete as it turned into solitary prayer before a television, laptop computer, or via smartphone, while sitting perfectly still. Receiving Christ via spiritual communion is something other than usual reception inside the church made of stone. The 2020 Easter celebration in the stillness of St. Peter's Square makes the Pope and few cameramen send a fresh message of Christ's resurrection throughout Christendom. In the stillness of everything, loudly speaks the truth of faith. Faith here is personal. With the stillness of pandemic isolation, uncertainty becomes certain to those with the purity of heart. When Kierkegaard talks about death, he says, my listener, if you fear this stillness, even though you are doing your best to have a conscience, then keep on, then endure it. This stillness is not the stillness of death, in which you perish. It is not the sickness unto death. It is the transition to life. This personal faith also opens up the world's perspective anew. In this pandemic, we fight sitting still on a couch. We realize washing hands frequently is not at all difficult. Long-distance communications strengthened relationships. Fast-moving countries like Britain, China, US recoiled and suffered from the effects of a second, even third waves of infection. Nations seldom heard like Algeria, Bhutan, Congo, Vietnam have become the trailblazers in flattening the curve with minimum deaths. Healthcare workers become as crucial as that of a congressman or a military general. Offices have become remote. Meetings happen in the comfort of the living room while in shorts and fluffy slippers. Stock markets and crude oil prices plummeted, yet the local retailers and agricultural products thrived. Major cities are left empty, letting creatures of the wild cross the streets, including those extinct. Even the most enormous hole in the ozone layer over the Arctic completely healed. Back in the Philippines, the once coveted capital as the center of finance and industry turned into a ground zero of contamination, proving that life in the countryside, albeit simple and still, is conducive to a happy and healthy living. With the pandemic, we realize that powerful, influential people are not at all immune to viruses, while the less fortunate ones are more determined and vigorous. All these life lessons are revealed to us in the stillness of isolation brought by pandemic and quarantine. In this stage of evolution, Kierkegaardian epidemiology suggests that faith is the opposite of despair. If this is correct, faith in the times of pandemic is a reset of the spirit, a reset of the self, and perhaps a reset of humanity. Thank you for listening, and good day to everyone.
Thank you very much, sir, for that very wonderful presentation. It's really timely that you have a paper like that, because it tells us about how do we see ourselves being sandwiched between the problems brought about by the pandemic. So to continue our presentations, we call on the third presenter. He will be presenting a paper entitled Decolonizing the Anthropocene. Please welcome Father Delfo Canceran. Thank you.
Good afternoon to each one. So I will be talking about decolonizing the Anthropocene. So I heard that the speakers have talked about post-colonialism, but not decolonization or decoloniality. They are both of them are critiquing the West, but they have different grounds for critiquing, especially on time frame. So the post-colonial begins with the 18th century, 19th century, whereas the decolonial scholars would trace back to the 1942, 1892, the colonization or the conquest of Latin America. So in terms of time framework, they are different. In terms of their sources of scholarship, they also differ. Post-colonial would invoke the name of Said from Egypt, and then from Spivak from India, Homi Baba from India also, but they migrated to the US, most of them US. So their context is different because they talk about their experience, colonial experience in the US or in the UK, as the case may be. So when you talk about decolonial, they get their sources from mostly Fanon, Franz Fanon, and then some of their native, because there were extant materials left behind by their great ancestors. So unfortunately, we don't have that materials We only have Jose Rizal, like that, but not on the 16th century. So that's the sources also, they differ. But they also, as I see it now, they are more or less, they are having their dialogue. So just a background. So Anthropocene comes from the word anthropos, human, and then sene, new or recent. So it sounds very nice, no? It sounds positive because it's a new human epoch. But as you already know, it's not positive effect. So the term Anthropocene encapsulates the concept of time period, which is a human period. Human activity has come to have a major effect on the natural functioning of the planet. So it's the effect of human beings to the earth, to the environment. How about decolonial? The word decolonial comes from two words also. De, which is a negation. Colonial, which means settled land or landed state. So coloniality is, colonial experience has been there even in the Roman Empire, even in Greece. No? Okay, so when you say decolonization, it's largely political and historical. Just like us, we were decolonized because the America gave us independence, quote unquote. So that is decolonization, when we achieve our independence from the empire, U.S. empire, for example, in the Philippines. When you say decoloniality, it's a school of thought emerging in Latin American movement. They're very active, these Latin American scholars, under the name of decoloniality, which focuses on untangling the production of knowledge from what they claim is a primary Eurocentric episteme. It critiques the perceived universality of Western knowledge and the superiority of Western culture. In other words, they try to delink themselves from Western knowledge. And how do they do that? Basically, they have to be aware of their body, the location of their body, as encapsulated by the expression of Mignolo. I think where I am. So we think where we are. Just like Filipinos, we are here in the Philippines, so we have to think where we are situated. So the coloniality scholars contend that colonialism did not disappear with decolonization because it is continued. That's why they use the word decoloniality, because it's a continuing effect of coloniality. Of course, we also term that neocolonialism, or there's another word, neocolonialism, especially. So what is characteristic of coloniality as a framework? They combine modernity and coloniality. They don't divorce that. In our philosophical studies, when we talk of modernity, of like Descartes, like Kant and Hegel, it gave us a nice picture also, because we delink, we separate it from coloniality. But when you put them together, these two words, modernity, colonial, it will change the picture, because the framework for coloniality is also coming from modernity, because they were talking about self-consciousness. Whose self is that? Whose self is that? Is the Western self, like Descartes, like Kant. Descartes is more on thinking self. Kant is more on synthesizing self, and then Hegel will be more on because the rational the rational is real, so the expanding self. So all these philosophical backgrounds would propel, would motivate people to expand. That is conquest and colonialism. Okay, so, or for example, where did they, during the industrial, after that, 16, 17, 18, during the Industrial Revolution, where will they get their materials? In the industrialization, they got it from the colonies, like gold, silver, these precious metals. And where did they get their workforce? They got it from Africa, this slave trade. So you see, so when you talk about modernity, you should all, being part of the global South, we should also insert coloniality to make to give us a better picture of modernity as coloniality. So 1492 is the period, the birth of modernity. For decolonial scholars, they would insist that the birth of modernity is 1492. Why? Because they said it's the date of birth of modernity. Modernity was born when Europe was in a position to pose itself against another. So notice even European thinkers like Levinas would talk about the other. When in other words, Europe could constitute itself as a unified ego. You notice that they use the word ego or self. As I already mentioned to you, the preoccupation of modern philosophers would be self-consciousness, conquering, exploring, conquering, colonizing an alterity that gave back its image of itself. In other words, this other was not discovered but only concealed, no? It's only concealed. Nawala tayo sa picture. We were out. We were edited out from the picture. There are two gestures of decoloniality. First here is delinkage. So you delink yourself from heavily Western thoughts. And then the second is, I will just make it, I will just summarize it. Then the next stage or gesture is border thinking. This is from Walter Mingolo. Yeah. So first delinking, you delink, and then when you delink, there's a space created, and that created space should be should include the people or the things from the border. It can be people, marginalized people, or even in the in our discussion is the earth or the environment. So I will skip that. Okay, the main point here is why do we insist that we date the Anthropocene in the during the colonial period? So it is bound up with the concept of power. The colonial and doing emerged from the 16th century as response to the oppressive imperial bent of modern European ideals projected to and enacted in the non-European world. There are two proofs or evidences where they are also this periodization of Anthropocene during the colonial period were supported by two observations. First is the transfer of plants and animals from America to Europe. It's like our experience of galleon trade. So many goods, animals, plants were transported by from the colony to the mainland or to the metropolis, to the Spain, like that. So that transfer would affect the balance of the environment. And second proof is the genocide of the many aborigines or the many natives in America. 50 million, I think, were killed, murdered. So that decrease of population would also change this the environment or the environment. So these are the two proofs that were already established in many journals, in many writings. So to make the case for colonialism as the start date of the Anthropocene, there are two reasons. To open up the geologic questions and implications of the Anthropocene beyond the realm of Western and European epistemology, to think with indigenous knowledges around the world. So this is the first reason, to shift our knowledge from Western knowledge, which we have seen as very dangerous, risky, to the environment, to the indigenous knowledges. So we have to learn from the indigenous peoples how they take care the integrity of creation or the integrity of the environment. Second, to make a claim that to use a date that coincides with colonialism is to understand the current state of ecological crisis as inherently invested in a specific ideology defined by proto-capitalist logics, such as extraction accumulation. In fact, Haraway, for example, would like to call Anthropocene as capitalism. It's more on capital, because it is already the beginning of capitalism. From mercantilism, then it developed into capitalism. So, that is her proposal, to get rid, because Anthropocene is still a very debatable term, just like climate change. So countries are debating on that terminologies. So here, what will be the impact of that when we shift, when we understand Anthropocene within colonialism? So we need to invert. This is already well known to us, the inversion of the self and the other, just like what Levin did, to invert from the West to the rest. So now we have to shift our focus on the others who suffered from this exploitation and this oppression from the West. That is the question of alterity, the other. And then another effect of that act of focus shifting will be going back to the myth. Myth means here the stories of people. So if you go to the indigenous peoples, they have many stories. I remember when I was a child, I am an Ilocano. So whenever we pour hot water on the soil, we always ask permission from the spirit. We say dayu dayu apu. Or when you pee on the tree, you have to ask permission, dayu dayu apu. So that means you are asking permission from the spirit to allow you to do something. So you see that kind of myth, which we have, which were removed by modern discourses, because they removed myth from the heavily rationalistic thought. So we have to bring back those myths in our consciousness. Another effect of that is back to the land. So here we have to return to the land. In modern thinking, according to decolonial scholars, they are not so they don't focus much on the land. They focus more on reason, rationality. And if ever they talk of land, they would think of private property, like that. They are not thinking of the future. They are not thinking of the value of the land as a common home. To borrow that expression. So we go back to the land, the value of the land, not just as a piece of title, but it's a place of our ancestors, of our stories, of our relationships. So it's more on relationship. So here now is the main point. So in dating the Anthropocene in the advent of colonialism, we are also, who are those affected by that colonialism? Most of them are the indigenous peoples or indigenous communities. So the decolonial Anthropocene draws attention not only to the violence at its core, but also the consideration of indigenous worldviews as a necessary political corrective alongside the self-determination of other communities and societies violently impacted by the white supremacist, colonial, and capitalist logics instantiated the origin of the Anthropocene. Aside from the indigenous peoples, we also talk of other than humans. The other than humans, we can think of plants, animals like that. Indigenous peoples continue to work to foster and tend to strong relationships to humans, other than humans, and the land today. This involves self-governance for indigenous peoples. We call here for attending once again to relations, to kin, to life, longing, and care. This commitment to tenderness and relationship is one necessary and lasting refraction of the violent and unjust world set in motion by the imperialist, white supremacist, capitalist heteropatriarchy at the beginning of the colonial movement. We also talk about the precedence or the past. The colonial challenges modernity's reduction of the real to empty presence. So this already been criticized also by Derrida, the metaphysics of presence to the surface of the present by posting the question of precedence. The question of precedence, the links from Western philosophy's grounding dichotomy between immanence and transcendence. The question of precedence names a relationality that exceeds in its temporality both presence as pure immanence and the transcendental as a mode of futurity. The mode of precedence cuts through the metaphysics of presence by bringing to the fore the radical openness, the radical multiplicity in time that precedes as grounding and as always already ahead. Any formation, the field of immanence in the surface of the present. I think this is also mentioned by Derrida. No? If you are familiar with Derrida, he talks about the trace of the other, our ancestors who preceded us. Another concern of the colonial scholar is the ancestral. The notion of the ancestral that is at the root of First Nations and Afro-descendant struggles. We see a temporal relationality that we are here describing as the mode of precedence. The ancestral is what is before us. It is before the before. It is always ahead and always already there. In the biblical narrative of Genesis, for example, when God created the world, there is already water, there is darkness, there is emptiness. This being there, this being, the word that's for them is a very technical word, being, is what in its precedence grounds relational temporalities. It designates a coming into presence that is always already there in its grounding projection, in its being always already ahead, and anterior in its foregrounding, in its being before the before. So what is the overall purpose of this decolonizing this Anthropocene? It is to achieve an ethical life. The decolonial option orients itself towards the possibility of the ethical life that undoes the mastery of the self. So as we have, as I mentioned, the modern philosophy is more on the mastery of the self that sees beyond anthropocentrism, where temporality is a becoming in relation, is a grounding precedence, and ceases to be vacated into an empty chronology, confined in the totalizing immanence of the metaphysics of presence. There is no possibility of an ethical life of intercultural justice without a radical questioning of modernity's monopoly over the real and coloniality's erasure of relational world. So, in summary, this decolonizing Anthropocene is going back to relationship, but that relationship is expanded beyond the human, and we have to go beyond that human. That's more than the human life in the or exist entities around our environment or the whole earth. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Father Delfo, for also that wonderful presentation. Although that is the third paper, then I think it gives justice to with the other paper presenters. So in order to just to recap the three presentations a while ago, Ahmed discussed on the anthropocentric nature of man to control nature. He noted on the effects of the Anthropocene to man. And one of the effects is that man is detached from his culture, environment, and history. The invention of agriculture, for example, became a cons rather than pros for societal development. Man has its natural propensity to survive. The invention of agriculture and the succeeding inventions of sciences and technologies are the ultimate expression of this propensity. The problem rises when some fragments of the population use these technological and scientific breakthroughs for some profit and personal gains, to the extent of undermining environmental degradation and destruction. Hence, man is detached from his culture geared towards survival. The second paper also presented about fear, sickness, death, which is he mentioned about that the fear of death is tantamount to an unfinished business here on Earth. It also reminds us that isolation that we've been through during the pandemic let us lament on how do we see sickness, the pandemic, and the Anthropocene. The third presenter also discussed about some brilliant concepts like back to the land and other than humans, which I think that these are good reminders to us who have inherited the world from our ancestors, that this world is not just for humans alone. There are other living things living here. So he also discussed about in order to achieve an ethical life, we should recognize that we are not alone or superior. So for man, to live ethically, we must recognize that we live with other living things in this current times. So thank you very much for the wonderful presentations. You are now the floor is now open for questions and comments coming from the participants. Thank you. Any questions? Any comments for that matter? You can place your questions at the chat box if you do not want to share it through a video. You have questions? So because there is no question still, let me first throw the first question to the second presenter. Can you see? Can you think of the possibility? Can you see the possibility of people romanticizing isolation, the isolation and the lockdowns that we have been through in order to overthink about life, our sickness, and our the role of being alive at this moment. That is addressed to the second presenter, Dr. Matienzo. Can you consider this moment of lamentation as over exemplifying the concept of death, sickness, and the problems that we've been through?
Thank you so much for that question to start the ball running, Professor Erick. I would say there is really no choice for us but to confront So I don't think we are over emphasizing this or romanticizing this, because we are pushed to our limits. We have no option. I'm speaking in the Philippines setting that there's not much choice but to stay inside houses. I was in, sorry, I was in Washington in the start of the pandemic, and yet just a couple of months I was again in the United States. It seems wala na. There's no more quarantines, no, as if everything is actually back to normal. In the Philippines, with the scarcity of resources, we are forced to really be, confined. So, one, I don't think we are over romanticizing this, because we have no choice actually but to confront this. Now, this is the irony. This is the irony, and this is what I would like to argue. This is a perfect opportunity for us to talk about reality of life, and that is, there is an end to life. But as if, this is the problem, as if it will never be, it's never a reality. This is not a new concept. It's just that the irony is that we always trust Anthropocene, the humanity's capacity to control over things, where in fact this COVID-19 put us to the point that we are not in control. That's actually my position here. So the more that I would like, how I wish, please, everyone, focus on realities of death, because these are very real. This is not mine, but many philosophers that would say that it's the possibility of all the possibilities. Why is that so? When you look at your death, you will put all your effort to give your best, knowing that you're about to die tomorrow, today. I will not corrupt. If I'm a politician, I would do the best I can. If I'm a teacher, I will teach the best I can, knowing that my life is ephemeral and I have no control over things. I think this is an opportune time to reset. We cannot do something about Anthropocene. It's there already, and the ramifications that is we are experiencing. I think it's a matter of attitude and look at things and have it as a kind of reset for the betterment. We will come back. We will come back. We will be stronger. We will be more sensitive and meaningful to nature, to ourselves, to non-human animals, and so on and so forth. Yeah, I think that's my thought piece.
Okay, thank you very much for that wonderful and exciting answer. Other questions, please, from the participants. We have 40 participants here. Definitely, there are possible 37 people that could give questions, address questions. Please, or should we end this this panel earlier? Yes, coming from our very beautiful and intelligent resource speaker this morning, Dr. Simangan. Yes, Dr. Simangan.
Thank you, Professor Calata, for that compliment. Thank you for the presentations, first of all. And I have a question for Ishtiaque. I'm sorry if Ahmed. I understand that in India, there's a vibrant scholarship about environmental security and environmental politics. But I'm wondering at JNU, which is a good academic institution in India, I'm wondering if there is a group of scholars or students engaging with the Anthropocene, and if you're the only one, or if there are other scholars as well. So not directly related to your presentation, but more on the academic environment at JNU. And I also have a question for Dr. Matienzo. I really like that idea of reset, because personally, it makes me comfortable with the uncertainties and absurdities, right, of the pandemic and of climate change. And I also really like Kierkegaard's contribution to this, especially coming from the existentialist theories. And I'm wondering if from existentialism, I'm wondering if the anxieties and possibilities that are very prominent in the pandemic, if we can also channel those anxieties and possibilities with the Anthropocene and climate change. Thank you.
Yes, who can answer first? The question is addressed to Mr. Ahmed and also to Dr. Matienzo. Yes.
Yeah. So in Delhi, actually, the concept of the Anthropocene is still kind of, becoming popular. So very few people are working on the Anthropocene. But it's kind of, it's gaining rapid popularity, and in near future, I hope that actually many people actually will research on the concept. But it's becoming very popular these days. Yeah, but still, unfortunately, very few people are working on it. But curiosity is growing, and in near future, I hope that actually many people, many researchers will work on it. Thank you.
Thank you, Ahmed. The other, yes.
Thank
Can you
you.
unmute Mr. Dr. Matienzo, please?
I have
Thank you.
access now. Thank you so
Yes.
much. Professor Dalia, thank you also. Thank you for that wonderful question. You have perfectly articulated that possibilities of existentialism, focusing their attention to what's going on as regards negative or even positive ramifications, consequences of Anthropocene. Yeah, that's actually precisely what I intend to do here, because these people actually don't have that idea. Existentialism, as you may recall, is more on the 17th, 18th, 19th century movement, philosophical movement. So when I was contemplating with the call for papers, not for participation here, what came to me at first is that this notion of uncertainty, of anxiety, and for the existentialism, they love paradox, that in the midst of this chaos, in the midst of this boredom, in the midst of these uncertainties, there you will see that the meaning of being is very much alive. Something like we don't define a human person, we are looking for the meaning of one's life. And I think this is a very good avenue, opportunity for us to really revisit our existing, our location here on this earth. Let me give you examples. Heidegger would be talking about existentialities, what being unto death, Dasein as being thrown into the world, very, very Anthropocene oriented, researchable topics. Gabriel Marcel would talk about primary reflection, secondary reflection, in which we human beings are so focused on the objectivity of things, on how are we going to develop technology, which on the process, we lose the very essence of living. Levinas is talking about, as Father Delfo had mentioned, the otherness. These things, in the moment of Anthropocene, we look at ourselves solely at the center, anthropocentric, so to speak, to the point that we disregard the non-human animals, the environment. With existentialism, there is really a point that we will be at a loss, and only on that moment we can see clarity. That's why I put in the paper with this existentialist subscription of Kierkegaard, the uncertainty becomes certain, especially for those who have pure of heart. Kaya palagay ko, the way I see it, I do believe that existentialism is a very good avenue where we can explore more and add to the discourse of Anthropocene. And I largely agree with you, Professor Dalia. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Other questions coming from Dr. Simangan? No more. Okay, so there's a question here posted in the chat box. The question is from Mr. Legaspi, coming from Mr. Legaspi for Mr. Levin about the melding of human and nature. Would this be a positive disruption on Darwinian theory, which has caused a lot of scourge in the world, like Holocaust and world wars, which were modeled after Darwin's survival of the fittest? So it's talking about perhaps the social Darwinism, which man is basically in the context of, pulling out together or bringing down together people or his competitors in order to survive. So what is your answer or your comments about this question? Mr. Ahmed, yes.
Yeah. So social Darwinism basically means neoliberalism. Neoliberalism is known as social Darwinism. So neoliberal development is like one of the contemporary reasons behind the Anthropocene. So because this kind of changes actually are being promulgated by neoliberal development. So obviously, kind of, social Darwinism is basically is one of the reasons behind the Anthropocenic changes. It is basically kind of, accelerating the Anthropocene, the detrimental kind of, this effects of the Anthropocene. So social Darwinism and Anthropocene both are interrelated. Neoliberalism, if I mean if social Darwinism means neoliberalism, then neoliberalism is obviously kind of, accelerating or magnifying the detrimental effects of the Anthropocene.
Perhaps Mr. Ahmed is talking here about survival of the fittest. So basically neoliberalism, there is free competition, and because we compete with each other, therefore people tend to put down or to have contests with other members of the society. Second question for Father Canceran. It says here that the Catholic Church was in the forefront of, what's that? The Catholic Church was at the forefront of colonialism. Western civilization is largely founded on her social teachings. What would be the residual virtue if we decouple or delink or disentangle our structure of government, the administration of justice, etc., of Western influence?
Yeah, you are correct. No, if you look at Western civilization, it is really part of that will be Christianity. You cannot separate those two. So, and another thing is church and state were one before, no? During those period of the empires. So we have still vestiges of that kind. We are trying, the church is trying to disengage, just like in the Philippines, you have the PCP2, Church of the Poor. So now with Pope Francis, we talk about the earth as a common home. So it's a transition period from disentanglement or the linkage. So if you follow that decolonial thought. So it takes time to delink the church as an institution. The church is not also homogeneous. There are different interests or different leanings of church people. Not all church people are elitists. There are those who are struggling for the poor, and there are those people who went even underground to fight the government. So it's the church is heterogeneous groups. So they are really those. But it's like our secular politics. May mga sip-sip, may mga opposition. So there are different colors, so to speak, of the of any institution. The church is included. So accepted. We have to accept our history, that we are part of the elite. We are part of the oppressors. In fact, when the word OP is, when you see my name, it is with OP, oppressor of the poor, they said. So, and that's also part of our history. The Dominicans were also part of the establishment. So we have to humbly accept that as a fact, but we have to reform. We have to transform ourselves into a more friendly to the earth or to the environment. Thank you.
Father Delfo, I have a follow-up question to the question previously asked. Can you consider Iglesia Filipina Independiente as a decolonial movement or a decolonial aspiration of the Filipino people? Because, of course, you made mention about that colonialism and the Roman Catholic Church is part of the part of the system. You cannot separate them. So can you think of the IFI, which was basically a part of the 1896 revolution, the efforts of the 1896 revolution as part of the decoloniality or the search of the Filipino people in order to decolonize religious belief or thinking? Because it's actually a detachment from colonialism. And it's also a detachment from the Catholic Church, from the teaching or from the structure of the Catholic Church. What can you say?
So it can be taken that way, no? Although the movement is not yet present during those times, but we can think of that as a way, as a decolonial decolonial attempt to. It's not just an attempt because they really separated.
Yeah.
So this IFI, so Iglesia Independiente. So and I know they are very active. This church, this group is very active among the grassroots. In fact, many of them are even branded as communists and they're being threatened. So especially in the far-flung areas. So, and I think the CBCP has just this independent Iglesia Independent, they just have their. I think there was a letter. I remember there was a letter released by the CBCP with regard to the relationship with this group. So there is an attempt to make a good have a good relationship with this group.
Okay, thank you very much, Father Canceran. I think Dr. Matienzo is also raising his hand.
If I may, or if there are no questions actually in line, can I also throw questions to Father Delfo? Okay, so Father Delfo, I was just this is also in relation, Professor Erick, that you are on religious institution like the Iglesia Independiente. In fact, there was also a conference on the coloniality. I don't know, Padre, if we were together on that scene also. I was this time proposing Hermano Pules Cofradia as a way of decoloniality, and my thesis there is actually decoloniality can happen even coloniality is still present. Anyway, that's also just to follow up what you were mentioning. Father, my question actually is in the context of Professor Walter Mignolo's decoloniality, how far are we as in the Philippines? You mentioned earlier the indigenization. How far are we, or have we started somewhere already, or we are still at the 0% in this decoloniality insofar as indigenization is concerned. By whatever aspect, is that religion? Where are we as in a Filipino nation? Have we completely, or are we still on the way, or we have done already a great leap? What's your take, Father Delfo?
Very sad. It's very sad. Why? Because Africa and Latin America are advancing towards this decolonial movement. So perhaps because they have a lot of authors, Fanon, Memi, etc. They have already established their scholarship. And even Latin America, you know, Latin America very active in liberation theology and now decoloniality. So they have already found, they already well established. But Asia as a whole, or Philippines in particular, we have a very scarce material and scarce authors. Because we have a project on decolonial, we are writing a book. So we are looking for Asian, and most of them, one of them was a speaker, another conference, Alatas, no? From Malaysia. So he is the only very active in this decolonial movement. So other than that, perhaps we are more inclined to post-colonial, not to decolonial. Perhaps because it is very, publication is political. Most of these post-colonial authors are found in the US, the UK, and they have the money to publish and publish and publish. Whereas for us Filipinos, very difficult to publish. There are many requirements, many financially we are incapable. So perhaps because perhaps there's a political reason for that, there's an economic reason for that. So as I said, very sad that we are lagging behind on this direction of the colonial movement. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. There's another question here. This is for Dr. Matienzo. Would the metaphor of sickness and death as an experience in isolation rather be a dialogical engagement to the death of the planet? Is not a lonesome death or sickness, but an imminent death or sickness of the human race, as we say human race. In an ICU on decolonialization or decoloniality. Kindly unmute Dr. Matienzo, please.
Yeah, thank you. That is a very complex and excellent question, which I unfortunately cannot provide a satisfactory answer. No, but what I can do personally is to reflect on it based on Kierkegaardian literature. That's actually where I am my research interest. He is very much fond of dialectic, of dialogue, dialogical, perhaps even though he hates Hegel so much, but the methodology of Hegel he was able to adopt. No? That's the dialogical, that dialectic. In fact, he does not immediately talk about faith as the cure to despair. He started with work such as repetition, and then talking about boredom, and then talking about concept of anxiety. Yan. Now, the sickness unto death, the reason why I chose that, I wasn't able to put that in the slide. Rationale behind actually is that's the peak of that dialogical, of that dialectic, when he talks about the darkness. How shall I put it now? Existentialists would see things in a dark way, but paradoxically at the end they are proposing that there is something bright, the unveiling, the aporia something meaningful, something bright, something beautiful, something free. Yan. So the question is whether we see the death of quote unquote human race, can it be, if I get your question correctly, can it also be a parallelism of that dialectic Soren Kierkegaard is proposing? A huge part of it, I would say yes, because in the beginning, of course, there is no man, as we mentioned. There came humanity, human species, Homo sapiens, and then this dialectic, which of course did not happen in an overnight, led us to this current situation wherein we have so much accumulated how you call this one, accumulated privilege, that we feel like we own everything. I forgot that term, for the lack of the better term. We have abused our resources. We have abused with our preponderance of reason, modernity, Father Delfo was talking about, as a consequence, abridged, and there's so many sci-fi movies and documentaries talking about the annihilation of human race, so that so many movies are talking about migration to other universe or planet. It can be in movies. They are very much enjoyable to watch over, but I would like to focus on our attitude towards this destruction. And in my paper, I was trying to prove that, although it's not yet proven that the virus have come from laboratories, but I would like to reflect that this is a call, this is a wake-up call towards humanity at this time of Anthropocene preponderance, dominance. That wait, hey, let's sit down, let's be still and think about it and talk it over. Otherwise, there is this inevitability of a destruction of our own race. So I would like to invite, let's stop for a while and re-examine our goals, our aims, about nature, about resources, about our own selves, even our faith, even our treatment towards one another. Because I believe that this Anthropocene made us into an instant, that everything is so fast, technology. Right now, we talk about industrial 4.0, where in fact 5.0 is already at hand. So everything is so happening so fast. But my contention is, wait, let's take it slow. And if you're driving so fast, if you miss up, the greater the possibility you get injured. Well, if you're walking slower, there is a chance for you to detour, to stop, to think over of the consequences to happen. I think that's also where we should be at this very time of pandemic. Let's stop for a while and let's listen to what nature is telling us, to what environment is telling us, before we continue to proceed. Sorry, take a long detour. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Matienzo. We are running out of time now. It's 3:04 now. Last two questions, I think. Just to before we end this panel. So this is coming from Mr. Leonora. It is disappointing to say that the colonial studies in the Philippines is still within the shadow of the colonial West. Do we have identity that could be considered as a Filipino approach or way? We want to decolonize, yet we have excluded from the voices, from the conversation in the indigenous approaches. I think this is for Father Canceran. Father.
Yes, the question of identity is also very problematic. Are you talking about identity as pure, unaffected, like authentic Filipino? So, well, when you go to existentialism, there may be authenticity. But when you go to with this globalization, migration, communication, transportation, what is now authentic Filipino? Do you mean the indigenous people like the Aita, authentic? They're also affected by Western technology. They have also cell phone when you go to the indigenous people. So what is really a identity is for me is an intertwinement. No, it's not a purist concept. It is an intersection of different factors. If that is the case, if that intersection or intertwinement of different factors, then what are we fighting for? Like why do you decolonize if you are not even certain? So the same dilemma faced by feminist authors. If you are going to question woman, then what are we fighting about? There is no woman. Because it's just a creation of patriarchy. The same way, if we are all affected by the colonial experience, then what are we fighting for? We are not sure of our identity. So that will be para bang you retreat, surrender, no? Attitude. So what we are saying here is we have to go back to our land. That's why I enumerated all those. Let's go back to our body. What do we feel in front of the American, in front of a European? Inferior? Why are you inferior? Why do you feel inferior? So the body speaks. And when you go back to your land, when your land is being grabbed by multinationals, then what do you feel? What are you thinking? So we are going back, we are returning to those aspects neglected by modernity: land, body, environment. Only now that they are trying to revive this one. So we have to go back to those marginal border thoughts, border thinking. Okay, so those are the suggestions, no, that we have to go through so that we can reclaim our identity. Identity is a project. It's not a finished product. It's a project. It's a vision that we have to struggle together. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. I think that the comment you made mention is connected to a certain theory on resettlement and or social theory or sociological theory, returning back to the city or right to the city. I forgot the one who created the theory. Okay, for the last question, I think on decoloniality still, if we project ahead, given that colonialism today is through technology, social media, internet, as we say, would there be a time when we have also like a decoloniality from Chinese intrusion, etc.? Okay, this is a tough question.
The colonial authors are not yet into technology. They are also very, they are anthropocentric and also environmental. So in technology, there is still a dearth of or scarcity of materials. But I would say that the same is true with the identity. So technology is part of our life. We are identities also, just like other authors would say, we are cyborg. We are partly machine, because we are imbibing, we are embracing technology. But the technology should be sensitive to the environment, should be sensitive to our ethnicity. So you see, there will be more like what the main speaker, fragmentation of technologies that is aligned with our own embodiment, aligned with our own environment. So it will be like that, no? In the future. That I do not know, is still a dream. Thank you.
I think we will conclude now the panel. Thank you very much for those who presented today. Dr. Matienzo, Mr. Ahmed, Father Canceran, and to all those who participated in this panel as watchers, or and also to the technical committee members.